Thank you so much, and welcome to this event. As I was saying to you a few seconds ago, but thank you for joining us online as well. We are having this third event building up to the G7 in Italy and beyond. We at ISPI decided to do 7 events building up to the Italian G7, which is going to be held in a month between 13 and 16 June. So today we are starting off with the third event of the series. We delved into the problems of trade, safeguarding trade in this rising context of geopolitical tensions. We've talked about how to solve the problem of rising debt. And today, again, a world of cyber threats. How do we, as the West, respond? Especially given the fact that we are, of course, in an electoral year, just before the G7. Next month, we are going to vote in the European elections, then in November, the US elections, and not just that. We know that cyber threats overall are not just geopolitical events that, can jeopardize politics, but also economic events, of course. Cyber theft, $5 trillion each year are lost in the global economy due to that. So just to welcome our guests here, let me introduce them. We have 2 in presence and 4 online, so thank you, Antonio Missiroli. He's ISPI's Senior Advisor and former Director of the UISS, the EU Institute of Security Studies, and Susanna Savarese, Cyber Strategy and Policy Manager from Deloitte. And then joining us online, we have 3 SC out of 4, actually. So Lorena Boix Alonso, Director for Digital Society, Trust and Cybersecurity at the Directorate General DG Connect of the European Commission, so European Commission representative. Ambassador Massimo Marotti, Managing Director of International Relations at Italy's National Agency for Cybersecurity, so the Italian representative. And then Rachel Rizzo, non-resident Senior Fellow of the Atlantic Council. So welcome all online as well. Let me start from our guests in presence. Let me start from Antonio Missiroli, because I wanted to take a step back and maybe reflect upon the threats that, the security threats that are at our horizon. So maybe, Antonio, if you can you give us, take a larger look and tell us what's on the horizon in terms of security threats, and then maybe connect them to the cyber threats as well. And that will give you a sense of why we're trying to take a deeper look at cyber threats today. Antonio, you have the floor.
Yes, can you hear me? Yes, good news. Thank you for the invitation. I think this is a unique opportunity to start discussing a number of issues we very often read about, hear about, but we don't have very often the opportunity to go deeper into. Are there rising cyber threats to our societies? The short answer is yes. There is an increasing number of hostile, malicious actors who act in a hostile manner in cyberspace and attack directly also liberal democracies and like-minded countries. There is a proliferation of hostile actors who can use technologies that are widely available even on the marketplace. And I think this is the general trend in this particular respect. Some of these actors, I would still say the majority, act with a criminal intent, but some, and ever more so now, act also with a political intent in order to undermine the credibility of our societies, to subvert our society, to disrupt, to destabilize. The good news in all this is that our defenses against these attacks have improved, in particular over the past few years. A few years ago, we were quite vulnerable to all this, and we were shocked by the discovery of the most spectacular cyber attacks, say, in the mid-2010s. Today, we are much better prepared. We are much more aware of the threats that is there. I would say that cooperation at transnational level, at bilateral level, at plurilateral level, among like-minded countries, even beyond the G7, has increased significantly. Consultation exists. There is an exchange of information. In traditional intelligence terms, in this particular domain, we have moved from the need-to-know approach to a need-to-share approach that has enormously increased our ability to deal with that. Of course, artificial intelligence and technological developments have made things riskier in this respect, but as you probably know, I don't know if you agree, artificial intelligence can work both ways. It can work as a sword on the attack side, if you like, to generate disruption, but it can also act as a shield on the defense side in order to improve detection, for instance, of threats that are out there, and it is being used in both ways. The good guys are using it for defensive purposes. We have achieved greater capacity in defending ourselves. We have acquired stronger and smarter capabilities. We are better focused on the task. Investments have been made in this domain, and as I said, cooperation has increased. This is not a rosy picture. There is no complacency about this, but I think it is fair to say that we are better prepared today to face evolving threats in this respect and more numerous threats than we were only a few years ago at G7 level, at the national level, and also at the plurilateral level. There are two qualifiers to this effect. One is the growing role and activism of China that was not there a few years ago. China very often acted in cyberspace for purposes of industrial espionage, predominantly for many, many years. Today it has widened the scope of its hostile action in cyberspace and is acting as a sort of systemic rival in this particular respect. The sheer manpower, the technological know-how that China can put to use in this field is scary, is quite impressive in this particular respect. And I would say there is more reluctance perhaps even to attribute attacks when they come from China than there is today when these attacks come from Russia or other hostile actors. There was a case just a few days ago of a website of the British Ministry of Defense that was hacked apparently by China, and even the government in London was hesitant, very cautious before going for attribution. Whereas, yet again, a few days ago, the German foreign minister went public by saying that Russia had hacked the Bundestag a few years ago. So she went public and she said there will be consequences. So I think this is a factor that you have to take into consideration. The second one that would lead us to a wider discussion is that the amount and the scope of cyber-enabled hostile activities has spectacularly increased. And by cyber-enabled hostile activities, I mean also disinformation. That is not a traditional strict cyber attack, but it uses cyberspace in order to disrupt, to destabilize, and to, in general, attack our societies. And here we are perhaps more vulnerable in this respect. Because of the very nature of our societies, we are liberal democracies. We do not want to respond in kind to disinformation by using disinformation ourselves, and we don't want to restrain our own liberties in order to fight better against that. That is an ongoing challenge, and I think will be defining also for the work of the G7.
Antonio, I was almost commending you for starting with a positive note, because usually when we talk about cyber threats, we often emphasize the threat element, but in the end, you did go towards something that is worrying for us, which is disinformation, and this is a great leader to go to online to Rachel Rizzo from the Atlantic Council. I forgot to mention that this event is organized in cooperation with the Atlantic Council. So thank you, Rachel, for joining us today from Washington. And my question to you would be, looking precisely at this information, or maybe in general, how do you see this particular electoral year? Seen from here, from the EU, in the end, it seems like, the positive side that Antonio was emphasizing with us is prevalent, and meaning that disinformation campaigns right now do not seem to have kicked off that much compared to how much we are responding to it, compared to other, maybe 2019 and 2014 times, at least to me, and at least to even in the sense of how the European Commission seems to be looking at these threats. So what's your view from the other side of the Atlantic, and what's your view for these next few months of elections?
Sure. So thank you so much for that question, and thanks for inviting me to take part in this. So you're right. 2024 is the year of the election. Nearly half of the world's adult population is heading to the polls this year. The UK, the US, EU, India, South Africa, Mexico, a bevy of other countries. This also takes place at a time where we're seeing an increase in political polarization, especially something called negative partisanship, which is something that Jonathan Haidt talks about. He's a social psychologist at NYU. And basically, where you look at traditional partisanship that involves supporting the policy positions of one's own party, its negative counterpart, negative partisanship, in turn means opposing the positions of a disliked party. And that's the kind of partisanship that we see here in the United States especially, but it's also ripe for disinformation. I think there are a couple things to look out for in 2024. First is the issue of generative AI. There was a quote in Politico recently that said, yes, 2024 may be the year for politics, but in this newborn age of generative AI, it may also be the year online disinformation finally gets the better of us. We saw this happen in Slovakia, for instance, just 2 days before the last general election, this deep fake audio recording of the Progressive Party leader discussing how to rig the election circulated online. So that's something I worry about, and the role that AI might play here. I don't think we've really seen it yet, but it's something to think about. I also worry about the same things we had in 2016 and 2020, for instance. YouTube is no longer removing conspiracy theories that claim the 2020 election was stolen. Facebook is allowing paid political advertisements that contain this claim, and I think that's a problem. At the same time, though, and this I think is where I differ with a lot of people that work on disinformation, I think one of the biggest problems that we have, especially in the United States, is blaming foreign interference for problems whose origins are very clearly domestic. The implication that foreign disinformation is effective at influencing major portions of the US citizens is actually really not true. And I think one of the biggest issues that actually contributes to political polarization is attributing very real issues to foreign disinformation. Not every idea that people have that you think is bad is because of Russian propaganda. So the reality is that foreign operatives rarely invent political divisions or conspiracy theories. They magnify existing ones. And I think that's what we really need to be concerned about. So there's a balance here that I think we need to strike that I don't think we've quite gotten yet.
Thank you so much, Rachel. So yeah, emphasizing and multiplying the threat, which is in the end, which calls for responses. So let me turn to the European Commission, because my question for Ms. Boisha Alonso would be, what has the European Commission done to prepare for rising cyber threats? We've seen a flourishing of legislation, if you think, either approved or proposed. There's the EU Cybersecurity Act, the EU Cyber Solidarity Act, the Cyber Resilience Act. So, there are all these terms, all these acts proposed and approved, but in what ways do you think that, in practical terms, can these acts improve on our ways to respond and as a society to our resilience confronting these cyber threats?
Thank you very much. Indeed, we've been quite busy, and I think it's very much due to what Antonio and Rachel just said. It's the context. We have gone from one crisis to the other, and there has always been a cyber aspect because it is present everywhere. And as mentioned also, we are also now very alert in the context of the European elections. So what we have been doing is not only legislative. We've been busy legislating indeed, but we've done other things. And I would say that we have acted on the legislative front, but also on the investment front, and a lot on international cooperation. Something that I think is very telling is that in the past, in the European Union, we've been focusing very much in prevention. And now we have been moving through also covering also detection, response, and deterrence. And we have been active in all these fields. In the field of resilience, we have been improving what we had been doing already in the context of what we call our Network Information Society Directive, which basically is about strengthening the security of our critical infrastructures. We have seen examples also of attacking to critical infrastructure, cyber and non-cyber, and given the geopolitical landscape that has just been described, it was necessary to reinforce the measures and also, very importantly, to cover more sectors. Sectors that today are considered critical. After COVID, for example, we saw that laboratories were cyber attacked. We include them now as sectors that need special measures. So we have gone also to cover public administrations. They are really the highest target of cyber attacks. And so now we are legislating so that they also take strong measures to protect itself, which means protecting the citizen. Something that we have done in the field also of prevention, and that is going to, it's already changing, I would say, the way we have been legislating until now in cybersecurity, is that we have gone now in with the objective to protect the supply chain, to regulate also the products. Because we have been until now imposing obligations on critical infrastructure, essential infrastructure, important entities, but often the cyber attacks come via the supply chain. So a software that is bought by a critical entity, and then you can have all the measures of the world that if you are buying a software with vulnerabilities, you may have a problem. And the biggest cyber attacks that have taken place come from the exploitation of vulnerabilities somewhere in a supply chain. So this is why we decided to come with the Cyber Resilience Act, which basically is saying no connected product, including software, can be put in the European market if it is not cyber secure by design and by default. This is, of course, a big change in the way we do things, because this may imply adapting even the production processes or development processes that companies are taking. But we believe it was really necessary because there was a sort of market failure. If something went wrong, there was no responsibility, and the cost was certainly to be borne by the user. So this is certainly going to be a big change in the landscape, because of course this is going to set standards, and that's going to be very important. In the field of detection, we've done something which is not only legislative, which is basically, and here I come back to what Rachel and Antonio were mentioning about artificial intelligence, trying to use artificial intelligence for the good. So basically supporting the networking of our member states so that their capacities to detect, the security operations centers are networked, that they buy jointly infrastructure using artificial intelligence as well to early detection of threats. So that's a big project that we have launched. Then to finalize, we have been also active in something that we were not doing before, which is in response. And here again, if nothing works and we have a large-scale cyber attack, what are we going to do? And this, of course, we all cross fingers, but one day may happen at European level that we have something that goes beyond one or two member states, but it's large. Then what we have created is a solidarity mechanism, where for the first time we reserve the capacities of private cybersecurity companies to be deployed in case there is a big thing and a member state asks for help. Then we would deploy this. This is the first time ever we do something like that. And we hope we will not need to use it, but basically we are working as well in being ready in crisis management. So to have mechanisms of exchange of information, but also of response in case of cyber attack. Voila, this is leave it there. Happy then to develop on all this. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. I'll get back to you in a few minutes, and I'm sure that Susanna here will have a lot to comment upon, especially on the company side of things, and we'll get much more practical in a second. But let me turn finally to Ambassador Massimo Marotti, because we've heard from the European Commission. Of course, the EU as a whole has some powers, but most of the powers to respond and in the end even to analyze rest in many member states. So looking at from the eyes of Italy as a presidency of the G7, but also as a member, my question to you, Ambassador, would be, you are at the Agency for National Cybersecurity. The agency was founded in 2021. How is the agency looking at cyber threats and responding today? And what do you think is maybe the most important threats that Italy in particular is facing, and Europe as a whole these days?
Good evening, and thank you for inviting me. The threats are all on, let's say, on the table. We are facing several threats, and we have just to be up to respond to all of them. We are focusing in this sense, implementing the national cybersecurity strategy, which design a certain line of actions. We are focusing in advancing, for example, in the expansion, in the enforcement of the cybersecurity perimeter, the law which pre-existed the agency established a certain number of institutions and companies, and the state guarantee the security measure to have those institutions operate through safe and secure network and digital systems. The second line of action is the reinforcement, the strengthening of the capabilities of the agency. We are expanding the network of the CSIRT, the Computer Security Response Teams, the national and the regional one, has allowed us to respond better to the attack that has been occurred, especially in the last 6 months. Another expansion, we have it in the network of the security operation centers, a model similar to the one the European Union is experimenting, and Lorena just mentioned that. We found that through a network of these operation centers, it would be possible to monitor the exposure to the vulnerability, and it's a way to prevent or to reduce the vulnerability of a system at national level. But we are also investing, and this is a peculiar mission that the agency has, in the research and technology and industrial development. We started a new program that supports business initiatives based on successful research projects. The agency will accompany from the research project at the university level to the development of startups, to the funding of a business plan, to the most difficult part, entering the market. All those line of action respond to the mission to reinforce the resilience of the national system, which is the basic mission of the agency. The last area, which is the area where is my business to operate at the agency, is international cooperation. That's probably is the most common answer that you receive from agency. Cooperating is reinforce our ability to prevent, to respond, and to reinforce our national system. And this is probably what also will be seen during this year, when Italy is the president of G7, cooperation in cybersecurity will be one of the priorities.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yes, of course, cooperating instead of fragmenting responses is possibly the most important thing to be done, especially in Europe, right? We're 27, but we face international threats that are very common. So thank you so much. Maybe now let's delve deeper, Susanna. So Susanna Zavarese from Deloitte, we were talking about, a little bit earlier about her work in the field, and we heard policymakers, you heard experts, but you've also seen practically what the impact of some, cybersecurity threats can be, especially in areas of conflict. So we talked about Ukraine and even the Middle East, let's say, conundrum. So can you give us a sense of what practically happens when there is a threat there, and maybe your experience from Deloitte for 5 years being there and having a look at how companies react?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So I have to say that I have the privilege perspective, let's say privilege of having worked with clients in both Europe and in the Middle East. So unfortunately, I witnessed in first line what happened when there was the war in Ukraine and now the conflict in Gaza, because unfortunately the clients, so businesses, companies, they have a concrete impact, real life impact. Before giving you a couple of examples, I would like just to bring your attention on 3 points. Unfortunately, in the digital space, geopolitics and generally speaking the motivation of threat actors is more important than geography, because at the end of the day an attack can come from wherever. It's not like in physical war where at the end of the day the geography is important. Second point is something that is the attack surface. Nowadays, and I can bet in the room but also online, people that are watching us, each one of us, in our pocket, you have your phone, that is an attack surface. In your phone, there is your banking account app. So you, on your phone, can actually have an entry point for an attack to steal your money. So the attack surface nowadays, it's humongous. Digitalization is everywhere, and companies in particular, everything is running digital. The third point, that is something that Lorena was mentioning before, unfortunately, is the supply chain. In the digital world, everything is highly interdependent. We have every company has third-party provider. The third-party provider are the one to be secured as much as possible, because maybe you can be aware of what can happen in your perimeter, but you don't know what can happen outside your perimeter. So if inside your supply chain there is a there is a third party that is attacked and is providing you a critical service for your organization, and I can give you tons of examples, I don't know, the data storage, or even the platform where stuff are running, your business is stopped. You cannot work anymore. So after said these 3 points of attention that we should always have in the backbone of our mind, I would like to give in these few minutes a couple of examples from real life. So let's go back in February 2022, war in Ukraine. We witnessed a case, so imagine that you, as so many companies face this in Europe, you have a company with a legal branch in Russia. So the problem was that coming in the desk of the CEO, there was the question, should we shut down the business in Russia? And the reason was not about, maybe sanctions are coming, maybe the business is, could have trouble. The problem was something that we call network segmentation. So the problem was that the legal branch in Russia was becoming a humongous entry point for threat actors to access to the company, and so to steal potential secret data, confidential data, information, because the intranet, the infrastructure is the same. And of course, I mean, if it's an insider, you know the organization, so that's the main problem. Another example that I want to give, just to give you a taste of how practical are the problems currently in the companies, is back in 2 years ago, probably even less, one of the clients I was working with, they had internally an office managing major incidents, made of 2 people. Now we are we're helping them in increasing a part because, I mean, they are changing the incident management process, they're adding the managing of threats. But now the FTE of this office should be of 8 people, from 2 to 8 people in only 1.5 years, 2 years, and it's a significant cost for a company. And third point, examples that this need of increasing the number of people is not just a problem of cost, but is also a problem of skills. Because now the kind of problems that you have is that you have to find skilled people that is not only about technical guy that finds the vulnerability, is people that understand the landscape, the threats, what is the where the threats can come and why that threat actor could attack my company, the motivation of the threat actors. And this skill problem, unfortunately, is something that everyone is witnessing, considering that, and that's the last example, the crazy increase of attacks coming through the supply chain. So the majority of the attacks is coming from outside the organization. Imagine something, I was telling you before, if my third-party provider of the data storage, of the cloud, let's not mention maybe the cloud because it's another word, it's outside my country, maybe outside Europe, and I don't have a control. I don't have a control over them. I don't know what are their vulnerabilities, if they run scans, if they do penetration testing on their assets. I don't know what that is happening. And if they don't tell me without undue delay, to quote the European Commission drafts and so on, I'm in trouble because my business can be blocked.
That's beautiful. I mean, it's super interesting just looking at the complexities of it, right? I mean, if you want to be, even if you want to build a, let's say resilient business, you never know exactly where the threat can come from, given that your value chain can be really global, it can be international, it can be elsewhere, and also the example that you gave us about the internet, right? So if an organization wants to keep itself updated, it's hard to compartmentalize when it's international again. So again, another vulnerability, another entry point, another threat level. Super interesting again. Thank you, Susanna, for this. So let me now turn at the second round. And given that this is a Think 7 event for the G7, I want to go into, let's say, the policy area. So given that we've described the threats, also the opportunities, also how we do respond, maybe what's left. So how can we cooperate better? So Antonio, to you, of course, you can take it from a more general point of view, but how can G7 make more steps towards the united front? Where are the missing ingredients, maybe some feasible possibilities for the 7 countries overall or as the West?
This is, of course, a challenging question because I know from experience how difficult it is to try and translate good advice or alleged good advice coming from outside into actual policy. But I would limit myself to saying 3 things. One is national level. For each and every member of the G7, there is a task to increase a combination of, how could I put it, computer literacy and media literacy. And the combination of the 2 is very important, especially when it comes to fighting disinformation. It's something that can be promoted at the national level by raising awareness of the risks, by also raising the knowledge of individual citizens and society at large about all these issues, because there is a specific task at the national level. Each national polity needs to be better equipped to face up to these threats. at the G7 or G7 level, that is plurilateral level. I think, I would raise a call for trying to achieve a degree of normative convergence. It is always difficult to fight against these threats when there is a certain normative setup inside the European Union, for instance, the Digital Services Act and so on and so forth, and a completely different one elsewhere. There will always be loopholes for a hostile actor to use these asymmetries or these differences. And I think, with all respect for the prerogatives on each and every member of the G7 and each and every group, it would be important to try and achieve a degree of normative convergence on how to fight this. And at the global level, if you like, a collective level, I strongly feel that in order to be better equipped to counter these threats, we need some sort of, political scientists call it epistemic communities. It's a strong word, but think about nuclear weapons, the role that physicists, nuclear physicists in particular, played in raising awareness of the risk of a nuclear holocaust over the past decades. Think about climate change, the role that geoscientists, meteorologists, and so on and so forth, their importance in raising certain issues and achieving a certain collective awareness of the risk, and therefore prompting policymakers to act on that. In this domain, cyber and cyber-enabled risks and threats, we still do not have such an epistemic community cross-border. And I think that the G7 could try and promote also beyond the boundaries of the G7 members an epistemic community that could help all the entire world to achieve the necessary awareness in order to be better equipped to fight them.
Thank you, Antonio. Thank you so much, Antonio, for this, let's say, sophisticated response in terms of policies, and especially epistemic communities is very important for a think tank, of course. Let me turn to the other side of the Atlantic again, to Rachel, and again, a part of the epistemic community, but as well, what would you tell the G7 or maybe Western countries as a whole? Where are we at and how to respond?
I think that a lot of the things that, all of the things actually that Antonio said are right on the money. I think the G7 has already gotten the wheels in motion for a lot of progress on this front. The AI Code of Conduct, for one, which basically urges organizations that sign on to that document to abide by certain AI principles for safety and such. I think that's a really good step. I also think that the G7 cyber expert group doing coordination exercises in the financial sector, which just happened on April 17th, is another big one and should be continued and expanded. G7 authorities do these routine exercises that ensure that they can effectively both coordinate and communicate their responses in the event of, for example, a widespread cyber incident affecting the financial system. So this specific exercise built on previous simulations and workshops, which focused on things like recovery management, crisis comms, and other things. And so I think for me, looking at both the past and the future, testing the resiliency of, say, the energy sector is a big one for me. Testing the ability to withstand destruction of critical infrastructure like undersea cables, which I know are being threatened, but also the resiliency is being tested at the same time. I imagine sometimes, for example, say Nord Stream 2 was up and running and the destruction of it happened in the absence, of course, of a full-scale Russian invasion. I really question the response and reaction that would have elicited, not just in Europe, but beyond. So in that sense, I think inviting non-G7 countries to take part in these exercises, both as actors who have experiences with this, just look at Estonia in 2007, that's a big one, but also as countries that can help create best practices for major economies. So look at the Baltics and Poland and Romania, for instance. They might not be G7 economies, but they're on the front lines of cyber warfare and can help create playbooks for us, which major economies can learn from and rely on. And then finally, the last thing I would say is partnerships with other multinational organizations are a big one for me. For example, cyber was added as a domain of warfare at the NATO summit in 2016, meaning that in theory, Article 5 could be triggered in the event of a cyber attack. So I think it's important to know how major economies and multinational institutions would work together in the event of something like this. And these are things that I think should continue to be tested as we move forward.
Yeah, Rachel, I think you brought home the point that it's not just the G7 that should respond, right? I mean, we need international cooperation, and especially, at the EU level. So let me turn to the European Commission and maybe ask, I know it might be, a conflict of interest type of question, but what do you think that your advice to the G7 should be, and maybe what are your proposals going forward for this year and the next after this electoral year?
I don't see a conflict of interest. Honestly, I think that one of the big lessons of the last crisis we have had, where, as I was saying before, and also the colleagues have said it, that there has been a cyber angle always, and this is why we keep on increasing the level of threat and of incidents. One of the big lessons is that nobody can deal with it alone. It's simply impossible. So we have increased international cooperation in a level that is unprecedented in the field of cyber. At the beginning, when I took office, which is 4 years ago, the international angle was mainly diplomacy. We were not doing that much in depth. Now, honestly, it's half of my agenda. So it really is necessary, and certainly the G7 is a perfect forum for this, because we are all like-minded countries there. So I think it's, well, many examples have already been mentioned by Antonio and Rachel. I can add the G7 rapid response mechanism, which is another very good example, because it helps information and analysis, and it supports the identification and response to foreign threats to democracies, like information manipulation, disinformation. So I think that this is also a very good example. In terms of subjects that I think really deserve close attention in the coming years in the context of the G7, I would say supply chain. We have mentioned it, many of us already today. This is a very important point that needs to be discussed. Critical connectivity infrastructure cooperation is another field that will need to continue to be important. And then I would say regulatory cooperation is important, because has been mentioned as well, if we have different levels, it's going to be used. And of course, emerging technologies. We've been talking about artificial intelligence, probably post-quantum encryption is another one. There are issues in the field of technology that I think deserve to be discussed in this forum, because voilà, it affects all. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much. I know it's not the whole field, but thank you for summarizing. And let me move to Italy then. So again, as the presidency of the G7, but also as a national actor within this community, how do you think that the G7 should respond? Do we have any practical advice? So, Ambassador Marotti.
Yes, certainly the G7 has dealt with the cybersecurity or several areas for years now. There is the Foreign Ministers Forum, there is industry and digital ministers, finance ministers, there are working groups. So we have certainly a tradition in studying and acting on the issues on the table. This year we also will add to the format the working group among the cybersecurity agencies for the first time. So we will have the opportunity to see also from the perspective of those agencies and centers for cybersecurity, and the way to expand the cooperation, the G7 cooperation, in the area of activity of those institutions. There is not probably a specific item topics to suggest or to recommend. But certainly, the most interesting one is the relation between risks and artificial intelligence, and also on the possibility of using artificial intelligence systems to strengthen cybersecurity. This is something that is already experienced, for example, in the network of the SOC. But this can be expanded also to find a way to prevent or to detect a threat at the earliest stage. So it's been certainly interesting the way we are going to discuss and the way we are going to address those issues that certainly are on top of the agenda for all of us. One last point I would like to make, that we also have to, in my view, work with the private sector and work constantly in order to advance the awareness, also the acknowledgement that a cyber risk is more and more a business risk. And without this acknowledgement, all action undertaken by states, organizations, will not be effective as expected.
Thank you, Ambassador. Actually, this is perfect because it leads us to companies. We talked about global value chains. We talked about value chains themselves. We talked about, let's say, first lines of defense, in a sense, and education, the epistemic communities. So turning to companies, maybe what's your advice to the G7 policymakers, but also in general, I mean, how can we improve this, make companies more resilient to cyber threats, more aware of them, and maybe how do we, I don't know, systematize this so that these higher cost on companies that you told us about doesn't impinge on a single company, but there's more easy responses, or even, you know, at national levels or EU levels. So up to you to tell us about companies.
Okay. So first point, in my opinion, like if I could have the chance of talking to policymakers of the G7, the main point that I would raise is the awareness of the management body of companies. So again, it's something that we were saying before. Now, cyber risk is not a matter of, I call them the technical people, but someone that as to look at vulnerabilities, the peculiarities of network or this stuff. Cyber risk is something that has to be on the top of the agenda of the regulators, of course, but of the board. So the board has to be aware of what is cyber risk and what are the potential impact on the business, on the organization. So it's not a matter of, oh, my computer is blocked. No, it's actually the business can be blocked. So that's the point. And
can I ask you
sure.
actually specific questions on this? In your experience in these 5 years, have you seen the awareness of the board increasing or not? And is it hard to work with, you know, let's say cash-strapped companies sometimes that do not have or do not want to dedicate that much attention to this?
Yeah, actually, on this point, Europe is doing, I believe, a really great and remarkable job. Because on this, I would like to quote another regulation that wasn't quoted, since it's specific for the financial sector, that is the Digital Operational Resilience Act. And there is a dedicated article on the management body. So on a list of stuff that the management body should approve, no, including training and awareness. I see Lorena there nodding.
No, because indeed, I agree with you, it needs to as well. So one of the main additions of the last revision of the directive is that now we really make management responsible. And this, I can tell you, because we are in discussions with member states in implementation, is working. You see companies already nervous about how are we going to implement. So it is, I agree fully with Susanna, that it is key. It's really key.
Thank you. Okay, please, Susanna. Yes.
Yeah, no, it's actually like something that Europe is pushing since a while in several regulation and is working. So now what we are witnessing is that this regulatory tsunami that was coming from Europe is actually having an effect because the board is becoming aware. And the second point, well, supply chain, we repeated several times, so I will not repeat it. But another point is the shift of the mentality of implementing regulation around cyber because it's a sanction. So I'm afraid of the sanction, I want to save money, I don't want an audit. But coming into the mentality of I have to collaborate with the authority, because the authority needs my information and I need the information from the authority. And again, Europe here is like shifting, trying to shift the mentality into these. Cyber is not anymore a matter of responding to a specific sanction or something, but to protect actually the organization is important to collaborate also with the authorities in terms of information sharing. The authority can give me a sectorial information that I don't have, and I can give to the authority information that they don't have. So this kind of collaboration should be there. An example always coming from the DORA Act that I believe it's great. There was an existing regulation, the TIBER EU. It was a red teaming exercise, voluntary, with collaboration between the banking sector and the authorities. Now in the DORA, they, let's say, improved and taking this TIBER, now it's called TLPT, threat-led penetration testing. And again, it's a collaborative exercise between the authority and the sector, not just the banks, but also critical third party, that it's another important point. Something, and is not an advice for policymaker, but rather a thought. There is a really interesting report that I suggest everyone to read of the European Systemic Risk Board, where they demonstrate that a cyber attack is not, well, is European Systemic Risk Board, but there is also the IMF, the BIS, a lot of international bodies that said that. They demonstrated that a cyber attack can potentially lead to a financial crisis. The example here is in the financial sector, but it's something that is applicable to all the other critical infrastructure. This in particular report was interesting because they actually say that imagine an attack to a globally systemically important bank. So unfortunately, what happened back in 2008, 2011 is unfortunately famous, was something happened to one organization and there was a cascading effect in the US market and then in Europe and then worldwide. These studies, they demonstrate how a cyber attack, so I exploit a simple vulnerability that nobody has seen, could lead to the block of the financial sector. So it's really interesting. And
yeah, so you brought home again the concept of the importance of resilience at different levels, at company level, sometimes of course systemically important institutions for sure, but even smaller, large companies large enough companies, but smaller ones, and the importance of cooperation between the public sector, the policymakers, and the business and regulators, which is super interesting. We never faced that, we cannot bring it up to the G7 level, but actually it's mostly an advice to go, maybe top down and also bottom up at the national level and EU level as well. So thank you so much. If there are no questions from the audience, I didn't see any online. No, maybe one. Okay, we take one question. Are there any others? Give me a second. Oh yeah, okay, so we have two questions. We take these two questions from the audience and then we wrap this up. So thank you so much. Please, go on.
Thank you all for your contribution today. It was very interesting and you raised a lot of fundamental points. But I expected to hear the word deterrence and cyber deterrence. And so I wanted to ask you, Dr. Misiroli touched the issue of attribution of these attacks at the beginning, and I wanted to ask if, like, moving one step forward from attribution, are there any repercussions for actors that conduct cyber attacks? And, for example, in more conventional warfare, targeting civilian infrastructure is a war crime. So, for example, targeting cyber civilian infrastructure could be considered a type of war crime, or there should be some like international legislation about that.
Thank you.
Thank
Yes,
you.
makes sense. Thank you. Second question. Then we'll go to Antonio. Yes.
Okay,
or third, actually. We also had
Working, okay.
Okay, if you want.
Okay, so we saw that the building a common framework and common tools at European level to protect the common market, the consumer, has been very effective. My question is, can we follow the same path to protect national public critical infrastructure?
Can you say who was it aimed at, or was it general? Okay.
General.
Let's see who answers that.
To answer.
And then maybe the last question, Cyril? Yeah.
My question was directed to the panel as well. Since cybersecurity transcends all borders, isn't this an opportunity to reform the G7 to a more globally inclusive body, especially for, most notably, India, for example, which will be the third largest economy in the next 3 years, the largest population, and already a country with digital citizenship and the means and the largest pool of informational technology exports, getting more global governance in a realm that hasn't really been touched on up until now, getting an inclusive G7 beyond what we have as observers and invitees. Wouldn't this be the opportunity to take that forward?
Very important question. Let me answer to that specifically. Of course, we're focusing on the G7, but be on the lookout for our T7 communique. It's out next week. It really emphasizes importance of cooperation with, let's say, global South countries, and also take in mind that India, for instance, is often invited in G7 working groups and ministerial meetings, right? Because it's considered a democracy and a very important actor. But absolutely, that's very relevant. Of course, when we talk about the G20 and T20, for sure it's gonna come up. But thank you for these questions. Then again, for deterrence, Antonio, I'll leave the floor to you. And for the second question, I don't know if there's anyone online who wants to take it up. Do you see? Yeah, maybe Rachel, Lorena. Okay, so Antonio, Rachel, Lorena, and then we close the meeting. Thank you. So can you keep it to 2 minutes? Maybe.
I will limit myself to trying and respond to the question on terrorism. A few years ago, there were concerns about what people already labeled as cyber terrorism. The fact that terrorist groups, non-state actors, could become dangerous in that particular domain in order to disrupt, to have symbolic actions comparable to terrorist acts, because terrorist acts are very often also of a symbolic nature. Now, I think it's fair to say that that fear has not materialized, or has not materialized very much until now. Terrorist groups have used cyberspace extensively for recruitment purposes, for, how could I call it, training purposes. You may remember during the darker years of terrorism in Europe between 2015, 2016, 2017, in particular Daesh, Islamic State, used cyberspace, the internet, in order to teach people how to build bombs, how to use knives and other instruments in order to attack civilians, or to use cars or even lorries in order to attack civilians out there. They have used that also for funding purposes. Very often it was a way of collecting money for the cause in that respect. And yet again, Daesh was one of the most effective players in that field. But most analysts today would say that non-state actors like terrorist groups would need the support of a state actor with important capabilities in order to be able to act in that field. In other words, a single individual terrorist group would not be able, in and by itself, to carry out a large-scale cyber attack of the kind that we have known over the past few years. Now, there are special cases. One is Iran. Iran is connected to terrorist groups. The Revolutionary Guard has been even sanctioned by the European Union through the cyber diplomacy tool, precisely because of actions carried out in that field, but they were not specifically terrorist actions, they were disruptive actions. So I think that in this respect, the good news is cyber terrorism has not materialized yet, if you want to add that. Now, a slightly different thing is the use of cyberspace in order, for instance, to potentially use infrastructure in order to affect an opponent, to affect the target. There were already cases in the past, in particular in the United States, but not only, also in Europe. I mean, in particular, railway networks have been penetrated in that respect. The impression is, however, is that these are more actions that are meant to be able to exercise pressure, including political pressure on the actor, rather than trying to carry out a large-scale attack that could cripple infrastructure in a given country. Or to obtain ransomware, but that is not very often the case of political actors in this field. But yet again, this is a situation that is in flux, and it is very, very difficult to predict. It's also a reputational risk to try and see what may happen next.
Thank you. Thank you, Antonio. Ms. Boycelenso, if you also can keep it to 2 minutes.
Yeah, very quickly on the need to have a common framework tools. I fully agree that we need to have them. You were mentioning, do we need to have them also to protect national infrastructures? I think this is what we are doing. And where, at least at EU level, we have moved from having tools to cooperate at the level simply of information sharing among member states to what I was mentioning before, of course, from a voluntary basis, coordinating, and Italy, as was being mentioned by Massimo, is participating, networking, infrastructure capacities of detection. This is, of course, to protect national interest, but I would go even further. We have been doing in the last years, and that is not only at EU level, it has been done also, some of them at more international level, coordinated risk assessments, whether it's for the telecom sector, for other sector, or other critical infrastructure, to jointly, all member states assess where are the risks. And then a next step after that we are doing also using common tools is once we have identified to carry preparedness actions that we are jointly financing, for example, penetration testing. We have entrusted the European agency to support member states in doing this. So we are doing a lot. I mean, in the last years, we have really moved to another dimension in terms of using common tools to enhance cyber resilience.
Perfect. Thank you, Lorena. I'll try to close this with Rachel. So, Rachel, if you want to add anything.
Yeah, just the very last point. Just a couple of days ago, the Biden administration rolled out the State Department's international cybersecurity strategy. This is the first that has been articulated in the U.S. In over a decade. And basically, the point of it is to elevate the U.S.'s role globally in countering cyber threats and trying to create global consensus on AI and position the U.S. really against China and setting cybersecurity norms. So it basically has this major focus on this newly created cyberspace and digital connectivity fund within the State Department. This most recent round of federal appropriations signed by Biden gave this fund $50 million intended to help allied nations enhance their cybersecurity. Before this fund's creation, the U.S. gave one-time grants for this purpose to countries like Albania and Costa Rica, following separate cyber attacks on government services in those nations. So from a European standpoint, I would look really closely at how this develops in the US and how much funding and focus is really made on it going forward.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you so much for being precise as well. And thank you for the audience that has remained with us until the end. Thank you for those who are following us online. I hope that it's clear why we focus on cyber threats today. And of course, again, given the G7, upcoming G7, but also European elections, we'll see how this plays out this year, whether our defenses are strong enough in the face, again, of geopolitical rifts. We'll continue to follow this through our G7 events and more, so stay with us. And I'll see you all again. Thank you again, Rachel, Lorena, and Ambassador Massimo Marotti online, and Antonio and Susanna here in presence with me. And from me, it's everything, and we can wrap it up. Thank you so much, and see you.